Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Help Is Here podcast, brought to you by the Beyond Compulsion Academy. In today's episode, I am going to talk about 3 big mistakes that I made when it came to overcoming pornography addiction. So the first one is progress at the very least, and talking about this idea of progress. And what I want to do is just share some of my old videos I used to create a few years ago before I met Mari Paulus, and the way in which I used to think and how that thinking led to me being stuck in the addiction. So this is the first video, a little snippet from it that I had a few years back.
So even if you're only going 2 days without porn and you used to look at porn every day, that's success. That's progress at the very least.
Now, that may sound very, very nice, and I know a lot of people will probably want to hear that, progress over perfection. We don't have an all or nothing mindset and things like that, but it just totally denies the reality of what actually goes on in an addiction. Because from my experience, what happened is I did make progress. I was able to go on longer and longer NoFap streaks and go more and more days without porn, but I wasn't actually changing my addictive neural pathways. Instead, all I was doing is substituting, distracting, and finding ways to deal with the urges in ways which weren't very effective. So an example of this is I did get into meditation, and I was doing like an hour every single day, but I was feeling so much discomfort during those meditation sessions because I had all these junky thoughts. I had all these thoughts about wanting to engage, or I just had general discomfort, right? But I didn't realize back then that a lot of that discomfort was being caused by being in the addiction. So anyway, progress at the very least, thinking that you can go on these streaks and really change your brain and then end up engaging again and then still change your brain. It just doesn't work. It does not work, because what's actually happening from a neuroscientific perspective is transcription factors such as delta phos-B are going to change your brain every time you engage. And when you choose to engage, what actually happens is you end up wanting to engage more and more and more. So saying to somebody that you can engage less and less, and maybe you're doing it like once a week and now you're doing it once every month, it just fundamentally denies the reality that when you engage, you want to engage more. That's what happens. The desire is created by engaging in the past. If you never ever looked at porn, you wouldn't want to look at porn right now. It's the fact that you've engaged many times in the past that creates the addiction and makes you want to engage more in the future, because your mind becomes involved in a psychological, emotional dependency on a mind, mood, or an experience. The approach I would approach this with now is the approach I do take now, and we teach our clients to take, is that choosing to engage as being back in that addiction indefinitely. It's a package deal. You can do that. It's just when you're in the addiction, you're in the addiction. And you are going to want to engage more, and you are going to be back in this constant conflict of wanting to engage and wanting to stop. And the way I'd frame it is, imagine you punched yourself in the face like once every week, and then you manage to get that down to once every month. When you get so clear on the consequences of this addiction and what it's like being in the addiction, you realize that actually engaging infrequently is not good enough. Like, your standard for your life and what you want from it should be so much higher than still engaging but just less frequently. The amount of days you go without porn isn't that relevant to changing addictive neural pathways. If someone reads through our script 100 times, they've rewired their brain way more than someone who's gone on a NoFap streak for 90 days through substitution and distraction, because those addictive neural pathways, that wanting is still there. But when you actually think through it and you realize the consequences enough times, you change the brain correctly and you become empowered, and you feel like, okay, this is a decision I'm making for myself. It's not something I have to do, it's something I get to do. And there's a massive shift in your brain, and you realize that actually, yeah, I could actually live this way for the rest of my life. I could live the rest of my life without porn, and that would be great. And there's not this like willpower, this tension, this wanting to stop. There's none of that. It's just clarity, peace of mind, openness, freedom, and that is absolutely possible. So that's the first thing I would say, is that you want to raise your standard and realize that actually you're not making progress by engaging less times. You're just getting better at substitution and willpower, and maybe dealing with the discomfort very temporarily until eventually a junky thought comes along that gets you to engage again. If you want to get clear on porn addiction, you have to realize that you are empowered enough to actually live the rest of your life without porn, and that is a possibility. Permanent mental freedom is absolutely possible. You can change your addictive neural pathways and get to a position where you never choose to engage again. That is possible for you, but the standard has been set so incredibly low due to things like NoFap streaks. And talking about NoFap streaks, another really, really key point to make here is that intermittent reinforcement is going to lead to you being stuck in the addiction. So if you go a few weeks or a few months without engaging and then you choose to engage again, all you're doing is intermittently reinforcing addictive neural pathways, and then you're back in it. So I remember in the past I used to do the NoFap streaks, and if I went like 3 months without porn and without masturbation and then engaged, I wouldn't be able to go on another 3 month streak for like 6 months at a minimum, because I'd then be stuck engaging like once every few weeks for the next 6 months or whatever, because I'd intermittently reinforced the addictive neural pathways. I'd gone back into the addiction. And so you do need to go cold turkey if you want to quit this for good. If you choose to engage, you're going to create so much desire to want to engage again, and then you're back in the constant conflict which you don't want to be in. You're not free. You're not gaining the peace of mind that you really want. So that's the big mistake I made in the past, is sort of believing that relapsing was okay, relapsing was part of the recovery and that was making progress, when actually I was completely denying the actual reality of addiction and setting my standards for myself incredibly low. And most importantly, just setting my thinking at a level which would lead to me being stuck in that addiction indefinitely and never actually getting out. Because if it's okay to engage like once every month and engage only, maybe once every 2 months, it's like, well, you're still engaging, you're still an addict, like you're still in the addiction. And I say you're still an addict, I don't want to make this about identity, because that's not what it is. It's about having addictive neural pathways, and you've never been taught how to overcome this problem, so it's absolutely not your fault, and it was not my fault. I was in the addiction for 9 years. I just hadn't been taught how to deal with this problem. I hadn't had the right education up until the point when I met Mari Paulus. So that's the first mistake. The second one, kindness and acceptance. I'm going to play another video, and we can I'll talk about this a little bit afterwards. Compassion and kindness, acceptance, so that if you do fail in not giving up pornography, what you can do is just have some kindness for yourself, accept it. So have some kindness for yourself, accept it. Well, okay. Again, I am here on this podcast, and I might be sounding like a bit extreme, but kindness and acceptance is not going to help you overcome an addiction. Absolutely have kindness and acceptance for who you are, but do not have kindness and acceptance for the addicted part of your minds. If you accept the reality of being in an addiction, as in if you accept just living in an addiction, you're choosing to stay the same. I would say, and I learned this from the coach that I had in the past, that people only ever change when their desire to change is greater than their desire to stay the same. And I think I got to a position in quitting porn where I'd got so used to it, and I didn't understand that permanent mental freedom was possible. I didn't know anything about the Beyond Compulsion method at all, that I kind of felt like the only way to actually deal with the problem was by accepting those relapses and going, you know what, this is like something I'm sort of stuck with here, and they're not too bad. I can still live my life, I can still have a job, I can still maybe have relationships, I can still have friends, I can still live a really good life whilst being in the addiction. So I think that's probably why, one way or another, after a relapse, I would be like, we need kindness and acceptance. And I think it is really, really important to distinguish the behaviour from who you are intrinsically, because who you are intrinsically is certainly not somebody who wants to be in the addiction. You didn't choose to be in this, you just haven't had the right education, and you've been unfortunate enough to live in a society where this is normalised and accepted. But just because the rest of society normalises and accepts porn addiction doesn't mean you have to. You know that the consequences are pretty severe for you, and they are really having a big impact on your life, otherwise you wouldn't be here right now listening to this. So you know that this isn't something you want to live with, and there's sort of two options. You either accept that you're going to be in this addiction and like be okay with being in the addiction and have the kindness for yourself and continue engaging, continue relapsing, and trying to justify and make excuses and trick yourself into believing that you're okay with that. Or you wake up and realize that, you know what, freedom is possible and I don't have to live like this anymore. And I absolutely can change my addictive neural pathways. I've just not had the right education yet. And I am going to do what it takes to change those neural pathways and live a life of permanent mental freedom. And then, you know, you can continue accepting yourself either way, whether you're still engaging or not engaging. But then you're no longer actually accepting the addiction. Instead, you're going to actually face that addiction and willingly accept some temporary discomfort and go through the withdrawal and go, you know what? I do want a higher standard for my life. I want peace of mind. I want more connection. I want more confidence. I want to really pursue that thing in my life that I've been putting off for a long time. And so let's not accept being in an addiction. I think we can all do better than that. And I appreciate that kindness and acceptance of yourself is important. But when it comes to addiction, we really need to face it and actually say, no, I do not consent to helplessness. I do not consent to being stuck in this addiction. I can overcome this problem. So it's really about going from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And that, again, absolutely possible for anyone listening. The final one that I used to talk about in the past is, you know, blaming a lot of irrelevant external factors in my life for why I was engaging. So I'm just going to play another video where I sort of share a bit about that.
Is that I was just trying to escape some issues in my personal life, like losing money gambling at one point, and also my mum's health because she has secondary breast cancer, and I was, you know, just trying to escape from all the worry, anxiety and concern around that area in my life.
So again, I'm not really taking any responsibility or feeling empowered at all when I'm talking about being in this addiction because of things in my life, you know, things like losing money gambling, and that was caused by addiction, or things like, you know, my mum's health. It's like, okay, well, they're problems in life. The gambling is actually due to addiction, and then my mum's health, that's just totally out of my control. And I'm a really big fan of Stoic philosophy and really focusing on what you can control instead of what you can't control. But back then, I did start to blame relapsing. I started to blame engaging on things that I just couldn't control and challenging emotions and things that I felt really disempowered around. But what I've come to learn is that actually the only reason people engage in this compulsive behavior, it's not because of what's going on externally in their life. It's not because of who they are. It's not because their sexual desires are out of control. The reason people engage in the compulsive behavior is because their mind has become involved in a psychological, emotional dependency on a mind, mood altering experience. Essentially, addicted neural pathways have been formed. And then they have all these junky thinking. They can't stop and they want to stop. And, you know, all the sort of the shame and the excuses and all of that stuff is going to be used against them to keep them stuck in the addiction indefinitely. I remember only a few days ago talking to a guy, and, you know, he was kind of explaining why he was in the addiction and talking about some really difficult things in his life, and they did sound really hard, you know, and, you know, I don't like dismiss that at all. You know, I totally accept that people have really tough things going on, and I feel very privileged that I have had a reasonably good upbringing. I mean, not perfect, but pretty decent, and there's people out there who've had, you know, they've had absolutely awful upbringings and they've had all kinds of trauma. And, you know, we work with clients who've gone through some absolutely horrendous stuff, like really, really horrible stuff. But that may be the reason that they got engaged with the porn in the first place, especially when they were younger. You know, I definitely accept that that's probably the reason. But staying in that addiction, in one way or another, it really does come down to now they have addictive neural pathways. So, okay, maybe they escape some difficult thing. Like for me, you know, talking about my mum having cancer, like, yeah, okay, between the ages of 12 and 18, maybe porn was a really good escape mechanism from me because my mum got cancer when I was 12 and I got into porn when I was 12 as well. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe that did help me cope with those emotions back then. But there comes a point in life where you got to realise that that level of thinking of blaming it on external factors is no longer serving you. And actually, if you continue to blame it on external factors, when is this ever going to change? Because you're always going to have challenges in life. That is just the nature of life. Life is hard. I do some volunteering at Samaritans, and, you know, I talk to callers every day who've been through all sorts. And the thing I was going to say a moment ago about, you know, having this conversation with someone the other day is, yes, this guy was sort of saying that the reason his addiction was so bad at the moment is because he was stressed, because of all these different things. But that idea that it's stress that's causing the addiction is totally flawed, because the addiction is what's causing the stress. And it took me a long time to realize this, 9 years of struggle to realize that actually the biggest problem in my life was the addiction. And then that was just being compounded by all the external things going on. Now I'm out of that addiction. I very rarely experience stress and things like, losing money gambling or my mum's health. Although, yeah, they may have been problems in my life, but they're things that I no longer really concentrate or think about. And I think a large part of that is because in the past, the addictive part of my mind would use external factors in my life against me to get me to engage, which may be a little bit complicated at first, but essentially what's going on is the addictive part of the mind wants to get people into a state of helplessness. It makes them want to feel like they're disempowered, and a really great way for the addictive part of the mind to get you to actually engage in your compulsive behavior is by taking you on this route in your mind into believing that you're not in control of yourself and that external factors can lead to you engaging. But when you really break it down and you realize that actually you are in control of yourself moment by moment every single day, and that most of the world is talking rubbish, you realize that none of that was true. And actually, yeah, you know what, I do have these problems in my life, but most of those problems are being made way worse by the addiction. And actually, if I overcome the addiction, a lot of the problems in my life will slowly somewhat go away, or maybe at least my relationship to them will dramatically change. And that's what's happened to me. My mum still has cancer, but it doesn't, my relationship to that has changed completely. And now I just have more time to be there and, talk to her and understand it better. And I'm not like kind of stuck in my own head trying to figure out this problem with porn addiction, which is a real great relief. So hopefully this podcast makes sense. I used to think in ways which I now believe are incorrect. I don't think that was my fault that I used to think in those ways. I'm going to be very open in sharing the ways in which I used to think, which held me back. I don't think there's any real shame around this. It's just I hadn't been taught anything different, and hopefully I can take people on a journey through this podcast and these YouTube videos to help them realise that the way in which they're thinking right now is maybe less helpful than it could be, and that when we change how we think, we change how we feel, we change how we act, and when we change how we think, we are able to actually overcome this addiction for good and live a life of permanent mental freedom. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for listening. I hope this has been useful. And if you would like to learn more about the Beyond Compulsion method, go to the beyondcompulsionacademy.com. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.